if you want to get out of it, at some point, you're going to have to remove yourself from that season of, yes, I had this experience. Yes, it caused these things in me. Yes, I'm afraid to, okay, now I don't want to be afraid anymore. Now I need to be in control of my life. Now I want to take responsibility. How do I help them navigate now wanting to take responsibility, even when the body wants to fight back, kind of thing?
Welcome back to the You Need a Counselor podcast. This is a show presented by Heart and Solutions Counseling Agency. We release new episodes every Sunday at 5 p.m. Central and encourage you to batch up that laundry, put away the dishes, plan for the week ahead, or do any other task that might seem daunting while you give our show a listen. You might just be encouraged to call your therapist, connect with this week's guest, or seek out those services you've been considering for a while but haven't made the commitment to yet. If you are in the state of Iowa and are in need of mental or behavioral health counseling, give us a call at 1-800-531-4236. Enjoy the show.
Hello, and welcome back to the You Need a Counselor podcast. My name is Dr. Julie Johnson. I'm the president and founder here at Heart and Solutions Mental Health and Behavioral Health Counseling in Iowa.
And I'm Chrissa Hunt. I am our vice president in charge of the behavioral health department. And this is our podcast, You Need a Counselor. So we are designed for people curious about counseling, but have barriers keeping them from experiencing the benefits of counseling. Our mission is to share stories about counseling, good, bad, and indifferent, and spread the message that everyone can benefit from mental health and behavioral health counseling services.
Our guest today is a 4-time returning guest. She is also a co-host of the You Need a Counselor podcast and has co-hosted with Chrissa and I on several different episodes, and just always brings such a great and unique perspective. I think because this guest has so many different interests and backgrounds and ways of looking at the world and of problems and of situations for her clients, I think it just really brings such a unique viewpoint to any of the topics that we talk about. So we love having her co-host with us. We've got Caurel Richards here from In Divine Thyme. She is a hypnotherapist and a rapid transformational therapy practitioner. So she runs In Divine Thyme transformational services, which are available online to anybody in the world, in any location. And really just helps people break down those complex childhood traumas, those barriers, helping people to let go of habits that are standing in their way or creating new habits in their lives, so that really people can live in a peace of mind that is sustainable and that allows us to be adaptable in our lives. So welcome, Caurel. Thanks for being here.
I'm so excited to be here. I'm always looking forward to our conversation. So let's see what comes up today.
Absolutely. We love having you here. So yeah, we'd love to hear what's new with you. Because last time we talked to you, we talked about athletes and chronic pain. We've talked about hypnotherapy, several episodes on hypnotherapy, which I always find fascinating. So what is new with you?
That's a very good question. I think everything and nothing is new with me. I think you understand what I'm saying, where I think there's nothing new that really is happening. It's just kind of how you're navigating it is new. And I think how I'm navigating life for myself is interesting and also sometimes heart-wrenching, because I've learned now to take more responsibility for my choices and my actions. And as a result of that, it's kind of being projected onto the people that I'm working with in a way where it's just like, I get it, I understand. We've all experienced complex trauma. We've all experienced some form of trauma. We've all had experiences. It's now moving forward. How can you navigate it differently? Because we can no longer walk with the excuse that, well, I went through this, so this is why I'm the way that I am. And now from a space of, oh, but I don't necessarily like or have an appreciation for experiencing that experience this way. how about I experience it a different way? And that means being open and honest with ourselves. So it's going to be a lot of that today. So if you're not ready for that, you might want to click off, but I would guarantee that you stay.
Okay, so being open and honest with ourselves and kind of, yeah, like owning up to your own responsibility for our actions.
Yes.
How do you kind of start addressing that with clients? And like, how does that process get
Oh,
started having that conversation with them?
I think at first it was tough for me because I'm known for that person that holds space for people. And I think I had to look at what holding space for someone looks like differently because holding space doesn't mean that I'm enable your behavior, right? And I think that's something that I had to face within myself is that for a very long time, I was that therapist that said, okay, I will sit with you, but how long will I sit with you in the shit? Because if you want to get out of it at some point, you're going to have to remove yourself from that season of, yes, I had this experience. Yes, it caused these things in me. Yes, I'm afraid to, okay, now I don't want to be afraid anymore. Now I need to be in control of my life. Now I want to take responsibility. How do I help them navigate now wanting to take responsibility, even when the body wants to fight back kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, our bodies like systems and they like routines and they like habits.
Yeah,
And so even something like the way that my brain will process a being triggered by a past trauma is a habit.
it
And
is.
our brains are great at habits. It's why we can go on autopilot sometimes. And that is helpful to us when we're driving to a location. It's not so helpful to us when we're experiencing pain. We're tripping because of the route that habit has
Yeah.
brought us down for the last 30 years sometimes, right? So it's a great way of looking at it where we say, you're saying, yeah, the thing that happened, the trauma, whether I can identify what it was, who was involved, anything, or if I just have that feeling in my body, right? I might know what it's from, I might not know what it's from, and that's okay because I have been looking at that, I have been experiencing that trauma, I've been stubbing my toe on this trauma, right, for the last 30, 40, 50, 60 years. And I don't really want to do that anymore. So I can validate and accept that the trauma is there, right? I can accept that, like, the coffee table is in the middle of the living room, right? But I can also, and I can accept that if I hit that with my toe, it's going to hurt. But I can also say, okay, I acknowledge that that's there. So I'm going to walk around. I'm going to take a different route to the kitchen from my living room. Because when I take this same route every time in my thoughts and in my reactions and my feelings, I stub my toe every time.
Exactly.
I don't really like that.
Exactly, right? And it's like
So
you don't want to suffer anymore. And I think that's the conversation is, do you want to continue to suffer? And it's the suffering is a choice at the end of the day. You know, pain is inevitable. If we accept that we're going to experience pain, then we can say, well, if I'm gonna accept that, how long do I want to experience this pain is entirely up to you. And clearly, I'm not talking to adolescents, I'm not talking to children, I'm talking to adults. I work predominantly with older women who are at a stage where they can make or should be making, I'll say, rational decisions. But some of us, and we've spoken about this in the past, some of us are stunted emotionally. So the idea of being responsible is like asking a 2-year-old to now start cooking their own meal. So you're like, I can't do that. When in reality, yes, you can. Yes, you can.
mhm. Absolutely. So my daughter is making all these bracelets and this imagery just came to mind. So she's making all these bracelets for this concert and she didn't know how to tie the end so that the beads don't fall off.
Yeah,
And so she said, "Will you make me like 10 of these so that I can just, do them without having to come find you?" And so I said, "That's a great idea." But then what I said was, you know what? Sit with me and I'll show you how to do it. Like, you do 5 of these and I'll do 5 of them, and then you'll know how to do it. And her immediate reaction was, I don't know how to do that. And I said, No, I know that. Right? Like, that's why I said, come sit down with me and I'll show you how to do it. But
Yeah.
isn't that, it's not just her and it's not just because it's eight. We do that all the time as adults, right? It's like, oh, should I learn about this thing? No, I can't learn about that thing, or I can't change that thing because I don't know how, right? It's like we have to have the willingness, right? And it doesn't mean we feel willing all the
And
time,
that's the
right?
truth.
It does not mean we feel willing, because if we wait until we feel willing to learn a new thing or do a new thing or create a new habit, we never ever will, because we're never going to feel like it.
Yeah.
And so what you're talking about in terms of holding space with another person, yes, I want to say to that person, like, oh man, it is, yeah, it stinks that you don't know how to tie the knots on there, right? And when you put the beads on the bracelet, they all fall off. That's nobody likes that, right? That would annoy me. I don't like that. Yes, it stinks that there's a coffee table in the middle of your living room and you keep stubbing your toe on it. I've stubbed my toe. That hurts, right? So we want to do that, because when we are building rapport, when we're understanding what somebody's situation is, absolutely we want to be doing that validating. And what you're talking about is, yeah, we want to do that, but we don't want to stay there when we're working with
Exactly.
somebody else or when we're working with ourselves. So when we say,
Yeah.
I need the validation that it hurts when I stub my toe
Yeah.
on this table. Well, I can validate that myself. I can accept that, yeah, that hurts. I'm allowed to feel hurt by that. I'm allowed to not like that, right? I don't have to have the immediate reaction to stubbing my toe on that table be, that shouldn't have hurt, right? I don't need
Exactly.
that reaction to be like, you got things to do, don't stop and rub your toe. You got, right? Like, those are the reactions we have. So that is a necessary, vital step to be able to say, validate to ourselves and to another person, like, that was terrible. I did not like stubbing my toe. My toe hurts now, right? I'm going to go put ice on it. It hurts. That's so necessary. But it, like you're saying, we can get caught up in that and we can get stuck in that. And then we don't
Hmm.
move on into, now what am I going to do? So tell
Yeah.
us about that. Now what phase of
Yeah, it's that transition is not as simple as you even just illustrated. It's not that simple. A lot of people, that's that sweet spot for them, because where you sit in that moment, you get a lot of empathy, you get a lot of sympathy, and it's, oh, I'm so sorry that you experience, and that feels good. We almost get addicted to that, right? And it gets to the point where that's the addiction, and you keep feeding into that, and that's where you get the constant negative Nancy's, or the people that are constantly in victim mentality, even though they've gotten past this trauma, it's still, I'm singing on it to seek whatever validation I need from outside of myself. So it's hard to pull people from out of that, is in my experience, because why would I want to leave something that feels so good to go towards something that I don't know what the hell is going to feel like? Because now I have to take responsibility. Now I have to face myself and say, okay, how can I take another route so I don't stub my toe? Or how can I be more careful when I am going towards that coffee table, to be more aware of myself and my body so that I am not stubbing my toe? And I think that's the part that we don't learn, because maybe the persons that raised us didn't even have that capability, that tool to say, hey, just like you sat with your daughter, hey, well, we can learn this. More time it's just like, okay, well, figure it out on your own. And you didn't know what to do to figure it out on your own. So you decided to live in that mode. And that mode is not going to get you to the success that you want. That mode is not going to get you to the life that you want. At some point, you're going to have to stretch yourself to get outside of that and understand and know, through reassurance, of course, because sometimes we do need the reassurance as human beings, because we're all experiencing this human experience differently. And there's somebody around you who can model, myself, you guys, that can say, hey, when I decided not to stay in that mentality, I saw so much more growth than where I was before. And you have to be honest with yourself about that, because you're not moving right now. if you're listening to this and you can resonate with, man, I've been doing this cycle, I've been on this hamster wheel for so long, and I've been doing the same thing over and over, and I'm not getting anywhere, it's because maybe you're making the same choices. They may look different, but it's the same choice.
And how do you approach that with your clients? Like those ones that are stuck in that hamster wheel and don't want to change or don't think they can change or don't think they can learn how to change. Like, is it just coming right out and having that like hard conversation with them, or how do you kind of approach
Oh
that?
yeah. You know what? And that's what I've been navigating because, like I said, for a very long time, I've been known as the person that, yeah, you feel safe with Caurel. But as soon as that version of me comes out, it's like, I'm sorry, who is this? Like, where have you changed? No, I haven't changed. I'm still the same person. I just understand that I can also do you a disservice if I have you sit in that space for too long. So, how I get them out of it is understanding it's showing them tough love. Sometimes it's a little blunt, sometimes it's a little straight, it's a little raw, and it shakes them. It's like a jolt, but I'm still there. I'm not running. They're not running. And it's saying, hey, I'm still here. And I needed to do that because you need to see a different perspective. Because for a very long time, you've been sitting in this mentality, and I may have been enabling it. But at some point, you have to go beyond that. Because if I don't do that, at some point you're going to be like, well, I'm not moving, you're not helping me. And to be honest with you, I'm not necessarily here to help, I'm here to facilitate because everything is already here. It's for you to make the decision, the responsible decision, to be like, well, if this isn't working, let me try something else. Let me try on a stiletto instead of a pump. I don't know, I don't know shoes very well. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a counselor, as a coach, we are a tool that our client can use to help themselves. So we're like a map.
Yeah.
A map is not going to tell us where we should go. So if I am hungry, and I keep using the hungry example, I must be hungry.
Are you hungry?
But if I'm hungry and I go, okay, my problem is that I'm hungry, a map isn't going to tell me where to go to solve my problem of being hungry, right? A map is a tool that I can use to go, okay, where are restaurants, right? And then I have to follow the directions of that map, even if it's GPS. I have to say, I have to be able to identify the issue. I have to say, restaurants near me. And then I have to pick one and then I have to follow the directions. So the map is facilitating me getting there. Could I get to a restaurant without a map? Maybe, maybe not, right? Depends on where I am.
Mm-hmm.
But being able to have that tool there is exactly what it is. So if I try to say, well, I'm hungry, I need my sat nav, I need my GPS to fix that problem for me, it cannot. It cannot because it's a tool for me to
Yeah.
use to get me to where I want to be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Will that tool always work? It depends, right? Because I think ultimately it's how you use that tool and why you're using that tool. And I think the why is very important because if it's about self-gain, and when I say self-gain, it's if you're trying to feed your ego, sometimes it's not going to work, right? Because your ego is very fleeting, right? It'll like something right now and then it won't like it the next second. So it's why are you using this tool, and what is the purpose of it? And I use that word purpose because I think it's so important for us to know why we're doing some of the things that we're doing. Are we doing it because that's what we were taught to do? That's the only thing that we know how to do? Like, why? Why are we using these tools and where are we headed? So you mentioned direction before. Where are you headed? Can you answer that question genuinely? Where do you want to go? Because that's very important in this human experience is where are you going? Where are you going?
Yeah. And so, yeah, you mentioned like you're not a helper, you're there to facilitate, not just like help them with what to do. Can you kind of go over like what that means, the difference between the two, and like how your services, like therapy, is approaching it differently as facilitating versus like helping them with what to do?
So I don't know, maybe it's something that I've heard in the past where the therapist doesn't tell you what decision to make. It's almost like what I do is you come in and you're like, okay, and I'll use a client that I worked with recently. She was in a position where a student wasn't behaving in a certain way during her lectures. And it was annoying her for whatever reason, and she didn't know how she wanted to navigate that situation. So I had to kind of dive into why there was an annoyance, right? Because humans are humans, they're going to do what they want. Why is someone else's behavior outside of you, why is it impacting you to the point where it's now affecting how you are showing up in your experience? And in breaking that down or even just going through it, the annoyance was coming from, oh, so I'm making this about me because if he's behaving this way, it means then that he's being disrespectful to me. But I'm like, he's not even thinking about you in the moment. So why personalize that? And it's just going through the stories because it always boils down to a story that we're telling ourselves. So when I say help versus facilitate, that's facilitation, right? Facilitation is you seeing, it's like putting those puzzle pieces together, right? Because we have this big puzzle with 1,000, I don't know, 2,000 pieces, and it's finding the right piece to match to understand why you're feeling what you're feeling and if that feeling is actually valid in this moment. So I guess maybe you can, it's interchangeable. Help and facilitate is the thought that's coming. Make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the difference. So, uh, I when I hear these kinds of situations, I go like, yeah, where am I doing that in my life? And so I always have to check myself when I interact at all with my daughter's gym teacher. Every single time that his name comes up, every time that like I get a report card and it's got like that gym section, right? Every time that I interact with him in any way, he's a perfectly nice human being. Like he cares about the kids. He plays pop music during gym, right? He's great. All the kids love him, including my daughter. She loves him. I immediately go into defensive mode every time. And it's not because of him, it's because of my gym teachers when I was in elementary school, right?
Wow.
So when I was in elementary school, we had to do a lot of drills, we had to do a lot of testing. I grew up in Massachusetts. There was a lot of like pass fail in gym. Okay.
Yeah, black or white. Yeah,
Yeah,
there was no
there
in
was a lot
between.
of like testing, and you knew what your tests were. You knew, and I grew up, I was a competitive figure skater growing up. My daughter's in her 6th year of dance. She's going to be dancing with the Minnesota Ballet. Like, we're fine. Like, we were getting plenty of physical education, right? But when I was a child, I remember and I feel that in my body every time something comes up about gym class or whatever, right? And so I know, and I go, ooh, my initial reaction is to say things to my daughter, like if she doesn't get a good grade in gym because she doesn't know how to skip or something like that, to be like, who cares? Like, that's so stupid. Like, that's my initial reaction. That's the thing I want to say
Yep.
to her when I see her report card that says, like, can't jump, like can't skip this distance or can't run this faster. I'm like, I don't care. But I always have to check myself on that because
Yeah.
when I tell that story to like my husband or somebody else, right, people can really empathize with that. There's a lot of people who have like major physical education trauma, right,
Mhm.
from being a child that's coming into even now when we try to work out and when we try to do things, moving our bodies, right? We have that feeling. So a lot of people can empathize with it. And that empathy can be a barrier
Mhm.
to that, right? So since I'm at a point where I'm like, okay, I know that this is happening. I know the table's there. I know that it's my reaction to walk straight into that table, right? And react to a situation where like my daughter's telling me like, oh, Mr. Conger played this song in gym class today, right? And for me to be like, he
Yeah.
doesn't know what he's doing.
That's a little weird.
It's so, and and you talked about like we're adults, we should be using our rational brain. And in those situations, my rational brain is just
Yeah.
turned completely off and
Yeah.
is going back into, 7-year-old Julie being
Yep.
like, I don't want to run this race, right? I don't want to do the mile. I don't want to do whatever. And then projecting that onto my daughter and her experience. And she's like,
Exactly.
I love gym, right?
Yep.
So it's yeah, in those situations you go, okay, like what is true right now, right? And with your example of like a teacher who has a child or a student who's doing things that it feels like, oh, that's disrespectful to me. That's putting my worth into question,
Yeah.
right? That's saying you are not qualified to be my teacher. You're not interesting enough to listen to. You're not, and when we do that, and when I do that with this gym teacher situation, I go, he thinks I'm not, but like, we do that and our
Yeah.
egos come in and something that challenges our egos
Yeah.
um is going to be sometimes a really big pain spot, and in those situations especially it's so important to uh to be able to move into that next phase of like, okay, but what is true right now and what do I have control over? So
Exactly.
I don't have control over my previous gym teacher or that experience or how I felt it even, right? It's easy to
Yeah.
be like, oh, well, if I had experienced that differently as a child, I what am I going to do about that now? Right? Like I can't change that. So that's how
Yeah.
I experienced it. That's what happened. So now in this moment, I can go, no, but what is true? The perfectly reasonable, kind human being of a gym teacher, right? He has not done anything to threaten me or my child. It's only my ego acting up. And so being
Yeah.
able to say, like, I'm going to say kind things about
Yeah.
him, as opposed to the things that kind of run through my head, because the things that run through my head are not true.
And that's taking responsibility. And I think I'm so glad you did that, what you just established, because I think when people here take responsibility, they don't know what we mean. That's exactly what is meant. It's saying, oh, this isn't about my daughter's gym teacher. This is about the experience that I had with mine. And instead of projecting whatever hurt, pain that you experience onto her, you're now saying, okay, this has nothing to do with her. Let me manage that. Let me navigate that and still be able to be present for her in her experience. And that isn't easy, but it's possible. It's possible, right? So it's being realistic at the same time to be like, yes, this is what it looks like. And also, it's not going to happen all the time, and to have grace with yourself, but also make sure that you're not causing harm for someone else who doesn't have anything to do with the experience. And a lot of people are doing that today. And I think that's why I'm so focused on having this conversation, because yes, I understand we get triggered. I understand that we all have had experiences, traumas, but it's your responsibility to navigate those traumas instead of making it somebody else's responsibility to navigate that for you. Yes, we can be interdependent and we help each other, but there's also more responsibility on you because we're all going through something that we're navigating at the same time.
So with clients, do you start with like the hypnotherapy part that you do and kind of transition more into like diving deep into these traumas that they have? Or like how does the process work when someone starts services with you
Oh,
then?
it's so subjective because I make sure the services are tailored, especially because we navigate things differently. So even though I have this umbrella, it's like, okay, this person needs to feel a little bit more comfortable first before I just jump right in. While some people want to just jump right in, and it's just figuring out who's in front of me. I think that's very important because what might work for one might not work for the other. So in tailoring it, I allow not just them to dictate, but also seeing what's best, and them also, it's a collaboration. So them saying, all right, I feel like I'm ready to do this. I think I'm ready. And at the same time, sometimes I have to take the driver's seat, because I can see when the self-sabotage kicks in. And it's, yeah, I think I'm okay right here, but are you really? is the question. So I'm seeing a bit of a challenger in my space because I'm the person that's going to ask that question that you don't want to be asked. Because you know if that answer comes out, you are now required to make a different step, take different actions. So I'm guaranteed to ask that question just because I know you won't.
Yeah, that's a really important question. And when we first got on the call, I said, "Oh, how are you?" And you're like, "Oh, I'm good." And and then you're like, "Wait, is that true?" And I love that so much because, like, how many times a day do people say, "Oh, how are you?" "Oh, I'm good. How are you?" "Oh, I'm good." Uh, Why do we do that?
It's
It
so
doesn't
true.
get.
It's so true. I went to the gas station yesterday and I had just got back from a doctor's appointment where I heard some really unsettling news, but news that I was able to navigate nonetheless. And he asked me, he's like, "How are you today?" And I said, "Patrick, I'm really sad today." He's like, "Okay, good." And I was like, "No, no good, no good." That question has become one of those questions that people don't really care about the answer. They're just trying to be, cordial. But I don't think they're intentional with the question. So when I ask someone how you're doing, I'm like, really, how are you doing? To let them know the difference between it being that versus this.
Absolutely. I always wanted to make a shirt, maybe I will at some point, but a shirt with like Joey from Friends on it, and it would say like, "How you doing?" And then underneath it would say like, "No, actually, how are you?"
Right? So true. So true. I don't know how it became that way. I don't know. I use the word loosely, but it's a little weird. Like, why are
Well,
you asking the question if you don't really care about the answer?
that's so interesting. I mean, it had to have been brought into our manners and etiquette and all of that because when we didn't have the internet, we didn't have phones, and we didn't have, right, when we interacted with people, we were interacting like to interact with them,
Right.
and not just to like get something done, right? Like, oh, I'm going to buy this milk, so I'm interacting with the person at the checkout because I want to buy the milk, not necessarily because I want to
Because I
interact
want to
with
talk to
the
them.
person, right? But if we were in a small community in Iowa, we're in Iowa, we still have these small communities, so we still have like people, or like the one that said like, "Oh, good," but we still have people that we kind of know, we interact with, and we get to that point where we're like, "Oh, I'm buying my milk, but I know that this person is probably going to ring me up, and there's like a checker at my grocery store, and like he's in high school, and I remember when he first started and all of that, right? So like when I talk to him, I really want to talk to him, right? Like I'm like, "Oh, yeah, you're doing great," because he's just like super enthusiastic about his job at the grocery store, which I think is just awesome. You don't see that often, right? So at that point, the person checking you out at the grocery store becomes a whole person, becomes a human,
Yeah.
like I know who his parents are, right? Like that kind of stuff. And then when we're asking, "Oh, how are you?" Like, really, how are you? Right. And then I can hear about like, "Oh, we had this pep rally, right? Or we had whatever." Great. Um, versus when we say it to people who we don't know or have really any interaction with. The other thing is, with travel. So, because in our modern society, we're traveling all the time, and travel meaning like our closest target is 35 minutes away from here, right? And traveling 35 minutes with a car is like, that's okay. But without cars, when we didn't have cars, we wouldn't have gone 35 miles to interact with somebody that far away unless it was like a medical emergency. And
Yeah.
so, because we're traveling more further distance from our home, we're interacting with far more people that we are having single use relationships with, right? Single use interactions with. And so I think that's where we get into the habit of saying, "Oh, how are you?" But not necessarily wanting to No,
No.
because we've got these single use interactions
Yeah.
versus somebody that, maybe you see on a weekly basis or something like that. And then you can start
Interesting.
asking that. So I think that's so interesting, like the question of, is that true? Because when you said that to us, to Chrissa and I was like, yeah, I want to know that though, right? And if somebody's like, oh, good, it might just be that's that, knee-jerk reaction to how
Yeah.
are you feeling? And you
Yeah.
expect them to say fine, and so you say, oh, good. But when somebody responds with how they're actually feeling, that's such a signal of trust. That's trust signaling. That's somebody saying, like, oh man, my day has been a mess, right? Then you go, okay, that is a trust
Hmm.
statement. Like, it's not a trust statement to say, oh, I'm good, how are you? Right? I say that to telemarketers when they call me, right? I don't trust them, right? So I say,
You don't
I'm
know
good, how are
them.
you? Right? But if Krista and I are carpooling and she's like, how's it going? And I'm like, oh my gosh, let me tell you some things. That's a trust statement. Um, and that's a trust response. So I love just the idea of doing that intentionally
Yeah.
when we are, and knowing that, like, no, I'm doing that because I trust somebody. Oh, do I trust that person? Yeah, I do. So why did I just say fine to them, right? When they
Yeah.
asked me, and it allows for that opening of the relationship.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm listening, and it's just the thought of, are we, because we're all having the human experience, right? How are we navigating this human experience? Even in those little, we're passing each other in the store, we don't know each other, but do we need to know each other in order to even say, I'm not doing so well today? Because you never know if that person has that openness. And I suppose the word that's coming to my mind is that vulnerability to just say, you know what, I'm not doing okay today, and not feel or think that that person is not going to be receptive or even open to hearing what's going on, because you'd be so surprised. I know it sounds a little weird to some people, like a complete stranger you're just going to tell your business, but if you look at it that way, it's gonna feel that way. But if you're just looking at it, one human being to another human being, just saying, you know what, today is not the day, and they might just be able to connect with that. And I think we've lost that element of connection. Coming from Jamaica, where your neighbor is your neighbor, but it doesn't even really matter if it's your neighbor. You can just say, you know what, I'm not up for it today. And they're like, you know what, I get it. To coming here in Canada, and it's just the complete opposite, was like a shell shock for me, but I also understand at the same time. And I think what I'm getting to is, I can see why loneliness is a thing, because we're not connecting anymore. We're not. These devices probably have more connection than we do, and they're inanimate objects. You get what I'm saying? And I think if we can do the work, because it's not going to be just oh, I'm just going to go tell everybody my business kind of thing. It's going to be like, who do I feel drawn to resonate with, to connect with it? Because we need connection. Whether you like it or not, we do, as human beings, need connection.
Yeah, and that's interesting talking about how you said in Jamaica, like that was normal to just say to your neighbor. So do you think it's a more like location thing, like Jamaica versus now living in Canada, or just as like now with technology, it's changed too?
I think it's both. I think it's both. It can be both, it can be neither, depending on who. But I think because we are very communal in Jamaica, um, I think I've been conditioned, I've been in an environment that says, hey, it's normal to just, versus where you come here, you say good morning to someone. The first year I came here, I'd say good morning to someone in the elevator. And it's almost like they look at me strange, like, why are you talking to me, kind of thing. And I'm like, you're a human being, you know? I walked into the elevator, you were there before me. It's just, to me, cordial to say good morning, to acknowledge you. It doesn't have to be this long conversation. It's just saying, hey, I see you. I see that you exist. and we're trying to get through this as best as we can.
Absolutely. I literally didn't even think about it, but okay, so when we, in certain cultures, so Korean culture, for example, much more communal than American culture. And when I was taking Spanish in middle school and high school, right, one of the first things they teach you is, hi, my name is, and how are you? And what we learned was the responses, which is muy bien, bien, right? Así, así, muy mal, mal, right? A variety of different acceptable answers to ¿Cómo estás? In English, the acceptable answer, you don't have that variety of answers. You can say them, but it's not established the way that it is in the Spanish language, where like you're going to say one of these things and you kind of decide which one is true at that moment. But in English, the response is good or fine, right?
Yeah.
And I just relate, like, when we're learning how to do that, if we're not modeled that, right? Like, which of these answers are, because it's an actual question, if we're modeled, right? Good or fine, then when we were learning Spanish, we just learned like, yeah, then you say bien and you know, move on with
Yeah.
the conversation.
Interesting. Huh. That has me thinking now, is it that we are taught to just say I'm okay, and it's just not actually you thinking in that moment how you are to respond to that question?
Mm. It's interesting. Like, okay, in Iowa, there's a it's super interesting, so I'm not even worrying about this podcast. But in Iowa, when somebody like scoots by you or like bumps your chair or something, they say, "Oh, I'm sorry," and then you say, "You're okay," which is like the weirdest thing to say. Because I grew up in Massachusetts, and people would be like, "You're okay," and I was like, "Yeah, I know, I'm okay. What are you talking about?" Right? But in Iowa, you don't say, "Oh, no problem," or "Oh, it's fine." You say you're okay for a lot of different situations.
Wow.
And sometimes I will find, and I have lived in Iowa since 2007, so a fair amount of time, right? But not the majority of my life. And I remember that being such a weird thing to say and to hear people say to me. And then I also find myself sometimes now saying you're okay to people when they haven't said, "Oh, excuse me," right? Like if they go by me and I can sense that they're like trying to tiptoe by so they don't bump my chair or whatever, I'll be like, "You're okay."
Wow.
Why?
You-
Right? Why would I
You're
do that? Or I'll find myself saying like, I'll be annoyed that somebody like ran into me or ran into my cart or did something. I'll be annoyed. And they'll say, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I'll say, "You're okay." No, you're not. Watch where you're going.
wow, the simple things.
What a weird, right? And Chrissa, you grew up in Iowa. What?
No, I was thinking the same thing when you were literally saying like in Iowa when someone bumps into you. I mean, I think I say more like you're fine, but same thing. Like, I mean, it's the same thing. So I wonder if that's like a Midwest. I mean, it's not obviously Northeast where you're originally from. So is it Midwest? Like we're trying to be polite? I don't know.
Do
It's
you
okay
live
that
in
you
Wow.
bumped
Canada,
into me.
Caurel?
Well, we get a lot of I'm sorry, even when I'm the one that bumped into them. I'm like, no, but I bumped into, so it throws off my whole, I'm just like, what? I'm
Yeah.
like, so automatically what I do, because I like to understand things, is I'm like, why are you sorry? They're like, I don't even know. So that's kind of how we're wired, we're conditioned. It's just like an example of sometimes how we're just going along just because it's what we know and what we're familiar with. You have to get curious as to why do I even do that? Why do I even say that? Because if you don't, you'll find yourself just in a loop, in a cycle, and not knowing why. So I'm so glad that we did this today, by the way.
That's so true for Canada. I mean, I've spent a little time in Canada, and yeah, it's oh sorry. The person who did the bumping into the chair will say sorry, and then the person sitting in the chair who got bumped will also say sorry.
Like, what is going on?
It's super interesting because we say things all the time that are not genuine. We
True.
say things all the time and we don't mean to. We're not lying in the sense of like who ate the cookie? Oh, I didn't eat it. Right? Like we're not lying in that sense,
Yeah,
but we're lying, we're still not being authentic and genuine when we do those things. And those
exactly.
are because we've gotten into the habit and pattern of doing them. We get on autopilot and then
Mhm.
we don't, we're not thinking about or being intentional about the things that we're saying. And it's exactly the same thing that happens when we get into that empathy cycle, right? Or self empathy cycle. And when we say self empathy, we really mean like pity, right? So self pity
Exactly.
cycle because we're used to it. And like you said, it feels good. And so it's like, oh, well, when I told this person about the thing that happened, they comforted, they said nice things to me. Like they made me feel like a worthwhile person. And if we don't get that in other ways, right? If we don't get that through either family connection or friend connections, where it's like, no, you're a worthwhile person, whether you suffered or you didn't suffer.
Yep.
But we can get so into the connection between like suffering and getting that positive feedback. So I'll give an
Yeah.
example. My one of my favorite videos from when my daughter was like probably 2, right? Is she is like laying on the floor and my husband's taking the video and he goes like, "Oh no, Monica fell down. Oh, poor baby." And he picks her up and he hugs her and he right? And then he puts her down. He's like, "There you go." And then she runs back over to the exact same spot and puts herself back on the ground. And then my husband picks, oh, poor thing, right? And in the video, it happened like 4 different times because it feels good to be picked up and
Yep.
comforted and supported. And so we can get that, or like, have you guys seen that squirrel video where he makes a mess of the room and then he like, you see him like get under a broom so that it looks like the broom fell on him, right? And it's a squirrel. And
I'm gonna go look that up, by the
yeah,
way.
I'll send it to you. But when we see that, yeah, suffering is what is it? It's pain is inevitable and suffering is a
It's a
choice.
choice. Yep.
And the pain doesn't feel good, doesn't get us a good feeling. The suffering does get us a good feeling in that moment because the suffering is expressed to other people. We're communicating the suffering to others. We can identify the suffering for ourselves. And so that has a positive feedback, right?
Yep.
Like if my daughter doesn't do her homework, there's a positive feedback to that because then she doesn't have to do her homework, right? But there is also the consequences for the future that we don't want.
Yes.
And in that situation, like, yeah, I can feel the pain. Can't change the pain or can't stop the pain from coming into my life.
Yeah.
Everybody has pain coming into their lives all of the time, but I can choose not to suffer, even though the suffering feels good. Like it's like,
And
oh,
I
it's
I
so
think that's, even though it feels good, I think if you also go as far as to say, okay, well, if I suffer, yeah, it feels good, but there are also other consequences, and consequences aren't necessarily always bad. They're not always good, but the bad consequences, and I use the word bad very loosely, the negative consequences, are they worth it? That's the question that you have to ask yourself. Is it worth, yes, I get the validation. Yes, I get the attention. Yes, I get the empathy. Yes, it feels good temporarily. But then what happens after? Does that part feel good? Does the consequence, that negative consequence, does it actually add value to where you want to go? And if it doesn't, then you're actually doing more harm to yourself temporarily. In fact, no, I would say more permanently, than you sitting there and getting the instant gratification of whatever that thing is.
It is and you referred to that good feeling as an addiction. And
Yep.
in addiction, we know that first 6 minutes is the pleasure part. So that first 6 minutes of somebody understands that I'm having a hard time, right? That feels good for 6 minutes. And after that, it does not feel good. So smoking a cigarette, that first 6 minutes feels pretty great. Okay. I'm not gonna lie. It feels great. But I haven't smoked, in years and years and years, because the weighing the outcome or the potential outcome of that against that 6 minutes each time, it's not worth the 6 minutes,
It's
right?
not.
And so suffering, we can look at suffering the same way, where we go, yeah, that first 6 minutes of telling somebody my story and explaining and feeling this way, feeling put upon, feeling like I don't have control over things and somebody else is doing this to me. That feels really good in 6 minutes, right? If I make a mistake if I cross the street, not at a crosswalk, and a car hits me, it feels really good to be like, that driver was texting, that driver did not pay attention, right? It does not feel good to say, I didn't cross at the crosswalk, right? But even though it doesn't feel good, it doesn't feel good to say, I didn't cross at the crosswalk. I crossed at a random time and I got, hit by this car. Long term, that statement, I didn't cross at the crosswalk, and taking that from the situation is going to be more beneficial to me in my life, because I'm going to cross at crosswalks going forward more frequently. And I'm not going to get hit by as many cars.
Buy as many cars.
I mean, I can still get hit by a car, but I'm less likely, right, to get hit by another car.
No, I get it. And I think what you just did is, because I think as children, that's how they think. It's just, oh yeah, I'll have tomorrow to deal with that. I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. But what happens when you're not okay, right? Your body doesn't repair itself like how it used to. Yeah, you're going to have to start making different choices, because long term, no, this isn't going to work. It's not going to work. So I think that's what the responsibility, or that's what the maturing looks like, is understanding that, yes, I might have the, what's the word? The wherewithal right now, the resources right now, but what happens long term when those resources aren't there to, keep you grounded? What's going to happen? So I think that's where the maturity comes in, is understanding that part, that it's not always going to be there. Time is going whether we like it or not.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we love having you as a guest. We were just like, time goes by so fast. This
Time.
was this was great information. With that, if you could give a suggestion to somebody on the fence about starting counseling or maybe trying out hypnotherapy, what suggestion might you give?
Well, think about where you want to go, and if the choices that you're making right now, are they rational, objective choices to get you in that direction? If the answer is no, and you find that you're still stuck in that space, yeah, therapy is it for you, because it means something is happening subconsciously that is telling you you're safest here, even though in reality that's not true. So it's piecing those things together so you can stop being stuck to move towards what you actually want to be a part of. So I think therapy is a start. It's not the end all be all. It's just the start, because at some point you're going to have to start making different decisions to actually start moving.
Absolutely, that's right. Wonderful. So, Caurel, we love having you here. We love to have you back again. Of course, you are always welcome on the show. We such great conversations, and I just always personally enjoy it.
I'm Caurel Richards, and I need a counselor.
Awesome. Me too. So does Chrissa. Everybody does. And you can find Caurel at In Divine Thyme, THYME.com. And you can also find her on Instagram at In Divine Thyme. So thinking about how time moves forward, and we don't control it. It keeps going, right? So I think very, very aptly named there, because when we're thinking about making choices for ourselves that are going to benefit us in the long run and not just in that 6 minutes of feeling good, it's absolutely appropriate. So make sure you check her out there. You can also take her free resentment reality check assessment there, which is very cool. I was checking that out too. Very, very neat, because man, resentment builds up in the body as well, and impacts almost everything that we do. So having that ability to recognize it and know what to do when we recognize it is so important. So thanks again for being here so much, Caurel.
Oh, absolutely. I'll be back next year. I'm certain of it.
Awesome.
With another update.
Yes, love it.
Well, I'm Chrissa Hunt.
And I'm Julie Johnson, and we need a counselor.
And so do you.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the You Need a Counselor podcast. We are so grateful that you're here. Now, we want to hear from you. Text us or give us a call at 515-650-3231. You can also find and connect with You Need a Counselor on Facebook and Instagram. If you've enjoyed today's show, please take a moment to like, review, or leave a comment, as all of these things help others to find and benefit from the podcast as well. If you're in the state of Iowa and interested in mental health counseling or behavioral health intervention services, give us a call at 800-531-4236.